Get away from my husband, you pathetic cow. Emma Catherine Morrison's hand instinctively moved to protect her rounded belly as the shrill voice echoed through the medical building's parking garage. At 7 months pregnant, she'd grown accustomed to moving carefully, but the venom in those words made her freeze completely. Vanessa Claire Hoffman stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, her designer heels clicking menacingly against the concrete floor. Even in the dim garage lighting, her perfectly applied makeup and sleek blonde hair made her look like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Everything about her screamed expensive, from her tailored blazer to the designer handbag clutched in her manicured fingers. "Vanessa," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. She'd known about Richard's affair for 2 months now, but seeing his mistress here, at her doctor's office, felt like a violation of the last safe space she had left. "Don't you dare say my name like we're friends," Vanessa snarled, stalking closer. "I know what you're trying to do, playing the innocent pregnant wife, making Richard feel guilty. Well, it won't work anymore." Emma backed against her car, fumbling for her keys. "I just came from my doctor's appointment. I wasn't looking for trouble." "Trouble?" Vanessa laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the concrete walls. "You are the trouble. Richard never wanted that baby anyway. He told me so himself." The words hit Emma like physical blows. She'd suspected Richard's growing distance had something to do with the pregnancy, but hearing it confirmed by his mistress made her knees weak. "That's not true," Emma managed, though her voice lacked conviction. "Richard loves children. We planned this baby." "Plans change," Vanessa said coldly, moving even closer. "Just like marriages change. Richard's done with you, Emma. The only reason he hasn't filed for divorce yet is because his lawyer told him to wait until after the baby's born. Something about better financial terms." Emma's heart shattered, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Even if that's true, it doesn't give you the right to ambush me here. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Vanessa's eyes flashed dangerously. "I'll show you harassment." Without warning, she swung her heavy designer handbag directly at Emma's protruding belly. Emma twisted desperately, taking the blow on her hip instead, but the force of it sent her stumbling sideways. "Stop!" Emma cried out, but Vanessa wasn't finished. "He doesn't want you or that baby," Vanessa shouted, advancing again. "The sooner you understand that, the easier this will be for everyone." She shoved Emma hard against the car door. Emma's pregnant body, already off balance, couldn't compensate. She felt herself falling, her hands reaching out desperately to protect her unborn daughter as she hit the concrete floor. Pain shot through her knee where it scraped against the rough ground, and her hip throbbed where the handbag had connected. But all Emma could think about was the baby. She curled around her belly protectively, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe now you'll get the message," Vanessa said, straightening her blazer as if nothing had happened. "Richard belongs with me, not some pathetic housewife who can't even stay on her feet." She clicked away on her heels, leaving Emma alone on the cold concrete floor of the parking garage. Emma lay there for several minutes, checking for any signs that the baby had been hurt. Gradually, she felt the familiar flutter of movement inside her womb. Grace was okay. Emma had never been more grateful for anything in her life. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to her brother's number. Jake Samuel Carter had always been her protector, even when they were children. He'd enlisted in the Marines right out of high school and served 3 tours overseas before coming home and starting his own security company. If anyone would know what to do, it was Jake. "Jake," she whispered when he answered on the first ring. "Emma? What's wrong? You sound upset." "I need you," she said, fresh tears spilling over. "Something happened. She tried to hurt the baby." "Where are you?" Jake's voice immediately shifted into the calm, controlled tone she remembered from his military days. "Memorial Medical Center, the parking garage. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move, don't talk to anyone. I'm 10 minutes away." Emma closed her eyes and waited, one hand still pressed protectively over her belly. She thought about the security cameras she'd noticed when she parked. This garage was part of a medical complex. Surely they had surveillance. Part of her hoped they'd caught everything on video. Another part of her dreaded having to relive this moment. When Jake's black pickup truck squealed into the parking garage 8 minutes later, Emma had managed to pull herself into a sitting position against her car. He was out of the truck and running toward her before the engine had fully stopped. "Emma!" He dropped to his knees beside her, his trained eyes quickly assessing her injuries. "Are you hurt? Is the baby okay?" Jake Carter looked every inch the former Marine he was. At 35, he maintained the same physical conditioning he'd had in the service, and his short-cropped brown hair and alert green eyes missed nothing. He'd built his security company from the ground up, and his reputation for protecting his clients was legendary. "I think Grace is fine," Emma said, using his strong arm to help herself stand. "She's been moving normally since it happened, but my knee is scraped up and my hip hurts where she hit me." "She?" Jake's voice went dangerously quiet. "Who did this to you?" Emma looked into her brother's eyes and saw the same protective fury that had gotten him into fights defending her on the school playground 20 years ago. "Vanessa Hoffman, Richard's girlfriend." Jake's jaw tightened. "The marketing director at Morrison Tech Solutions." Emma blinked in surprise. "And you know her?" "I know of her. My company handles security for several buildings downtown, including Richard's office complex." Jake's expression grew thunderous. "She attacked you? A pregnant woman?" "She said Richard doesn't want the baby, that he's planning to divorce me after Grace is born for better financial terms." Emma's voice broke. "She hit me with her purse, right at my stomach. When I tried to get away, she shoved me down." Jake helped Emma into his truck and buckled her seatbelt carefully around her pregnant belly. "We're going to the emergency room first, then we're calling the police." "Jake, I don't want to cause trouble for Richard's business." "Richard's business?" Jake's voice was incredulous. "Emma, his mistress, just assaulted you and tried to hurt your unborn child. I don't give a damn about his business." As they drove toward the hospital, Jake made a series of phone calls using his hands-free system. Emma listened as he contacted his security team and asked them to pull footage from the Memorial Medical Center parking garage for the past 2 hours. "Yes, Jimmy, this is personal," he said into his headset. "My sister was attacked. I need that footage secured and copied before anyone else can get to it." Emma realized then that her brother had been watching out for her in ways she'd never known. His security company had contracts all over the city. He'd positioned himself to keep an eye on her life, even when she didn't know it. "How long have you known about Richard's affair?" Jake asked quietly once he'd finished his calls. 2 months, Emma admitted. "I found charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never been to, hotels during business trips that were supposed to be day meetings. When I confronted him, he said I was being paranoid and blamed it on pregnancy hormones." Jake's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "Pregnancy hormones. That son of a—" He caught himself. "Emma, you should have called me the minute you suspected something. I thought I could handle it. I thought maybe after Grace was born, things would get better between us. And now?" Emma touched her scraped knee and winced. "Now I know that Vanessa was right about one thing. Richard really doesn't want this baby, and if he doesn't want Grace, then he doesn't want me either." They pulled into the emergency room parking lot, and Jake came around to help Emma out of the truck. As they walked toward the entrance, Emma felt something shift inside her. Not the baby. Grace was still moving normally. It was something else. A hardening of resolve, maybe. A recognition that the woman who'd walked into that doctor's appointment an hour ago had been living in denial. The woman walking into this emergency room knew exactly where she stood. Jake stayed beside her as they approached the reception desk, his presence a comforting wall of protection. Emma realized that for the first time in months, she felt truly safe. But she also felt something else. Angry. Vanessa Hoffman had made a serious mistake targeting a pregnant woman in a medical center parking garage, and she'd made an even bigger mistake targeting the sister of a man who made his living protecting people. Emma was going to make sure Vanessa learned exactly how big a mistake that was. "Nobody touches my sister. Nobody." Jake paced the emergency room waiting area like a caged predator while Dr. Sarah Mitchell examined Emma. His military training had taught him to compartmentalize emotions during a crisis. But this wasn't just any crisis. This was his little sister, pregnant and hurt because some entitled woman thought she could assault people without consequences. 25 minutes later, Dr. Mitchell emerged with Emma, who looked pale but determined. "The baby is perfectly fine," the doctor announced, and Jake felt his shoulders relax for the first time since Emma's phone call. "Emma's injuries are superficial, Scraped knee, bruised hip, no signs of trauma to the pregnancy, but I want her to take it easy for the next few days. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, Emma said quietly. Jake studied his sister's face. The physical injuries might be minor, but the emotional damage was written clearly in her eyes. The Emma who'd gone to her doctor's appointment that morning had still harbored hope for her marriage. The Emma sitting beside him now looked like a woman who'd finally seen the truth. Emma, we need to talk about what happened, Jake said gently as Dr. Mitchell left them alone. I need details. Everything you remember. I told you already, Vanessa was waiting for me in the parking garage. She said Richard doesn't want the baby, that he's planning to divorce me after Grace is born. Then she attacked me. Think like a witness, not a victim, Jake said, falling back on his military training. What exactly did she say about Richard's plans? Emma closed her eyes, clearly reliving the encounter. She said Richard's lawyer told him to wait until after the baby's born because of better financial terms. She knew specific details, Jake. This wasn't just an angry mistress lashing out. She knew things. Jake pulled out his phone and opened the voice recording app. I'm going to record this, okay? For the police report. Emma nodded and began recounting the attack in careful detail. As she spoke, Jake felt his anger crystallize into something more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury. The kind that had made him an effective Marine and now made him an excellent head of security. She specifically targeted your stomach with the purse, he confirmed. Yes, she aimed right at the baby. And she pushed you after you tried to get away. She said maybe I'd get the message after I couldn't stay on my feet. Jake stopped the recording and saved it to his secure cloud storage. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. How long has Richard been pulling away from you emotionally? Emma was quiet for a long moment. It started around month 4 of the pregnancy, right after we found out we were having a girl. I thought he was just nervous about being a father, but what? He stopped touching my belly when the baby would kick. He used to love feeling her move, but then he just stopped, and he started working later, taking more business trips, spending less time at home. Jake felt pieces clicking into place. Emma, I need to tell you something. My security company has contracts with several buildings in Richard's business district. Morrison Tech Solutions isn't one of our clients directly, but we handle security for the restaurant where Richard's been taking Vanessa for their so-called business dinners. Emma stared at him. You've been watching him? Not intentionally, but when you mentioned the suspicious credit card charges 2 months ago, I may have paid attention to which of my client locations Richard frequented. Jake's expression was grim. He's been there every Thursday night for the past 8 months. Same table, same woman, same pattern. They're not hiding as well as they think they are. 8 months, Emma whispered. Almost the entire pregnancy. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his colleague, Jimmy Thompson. He read it quickly, and his expression darkened further. What is it? Emma asked. Jimmy pulled the security footage from the parking garage. He's enhancing it now, but the preliminary view shows everything clearly. Vanessa waiting for you, following you to your car, the attack, everything. We have her on video deliberately targeting a pregnant woman. Emma started to cry again, but these tears were different. They weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of relief that someone finally believed her, finally had proof of what had happened. But there's something else, Jake continued, his voice careful. Jimmy ran a background check on Vanessa Hoffman while he was pulling the footage. What kind of background check? The kind that shows recent medical appointments. Jake took his sister's hand. Emma, Vanessa's pregnant too. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She stared at her brother, trying to process this information. Pregnant. 10 weeks according to her medical records, which means Richard got his mistress pregnant while I was carrying his child. Emma's voice was hollow. No wonder he doesn't want Grace. He's starting a new family with Vanessa. Jake watched his sister's face transform. The hurt was still there, but it was being joined by something stronger. Determination. Jake, I need to see that security footage. Are you sure? It might be difficult to watch. I need to see it. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Jake pulled out his tablet and connected to his company's secure server. Within minutes, he had the enhanced footage loaded. They watched together as Vanessa emerged from behind the pillar, confronted Emma, and deliberately attacked her. "Play it again," Emma said quietly. They watched it 3 more times. Each viewing revealed new details. Vanessa checking her watch before Emma appeared, suggesting she'd been waiting for a specific time. Her deliberate aim at Emma's stomach. The calculated way she adjusted her appearance after the attack, as if she'd planned what came next. This wasn't random anger, Emma realized. This was premeditated. "That's what makes it aggravated assault instead of simple battery," Jake confirmed. "And since you're pregnant, it could be elevated to a felony." Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she'd learned. Her husband didn't want their baby. His mistress was pregnant with his child. The attack hadn't been a moment of jealous rage. It had been a calculated attempt to eliminate what Vanessa saw as competition. "I've been so stupid," Emma finally said. "No, you've been hopeful. There's a difference. I kept thinking that if I just tried harder, if I was a better wife, if I made things easier for Richard during the pregnancy, maybe we could work things out." Emma's voice strengthened. "But you can't fix a marriage when your husband is building a new life with someone else." Jake's phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the caller ID, and Jake showed it to Emma. "He probably heard about the hospital visit from his insurance company," Jake said. "What do you want to do?" Emma stared at the phone for a moment, then reached for it. "I want to hear what he has to say." She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Richard." "Emma, what the hell is going on? I got a call that you were in the emergency room. Are you trying to create drama for my business?" Jake watched his sister's face close off completely. The last vestige of hope in her eyes died. "I was attacked in the parking garage at the medical center," Emma said calmly. "By Vanessa. That's ridiculous. Vanessa would never do something like that. You probably fell. Pregnancy makes women clumsy." Emma met Jake's eyes, and he saw his own fury reflected there. "I see," she said quietly. "So you think I imagined being pushed down and having my pregnant belly targeted with a purse? I think you're being dramatic. Vanessa told me she ran into you, and you seemed upset, but she said you were fine when she left." "Vanessa told you." Emma's voice was deadly calm now. "When did she tell you this, Richard?" There was a pause. Jake could practically hear Richard realizing he'd revealed too much. "She called me afterward, worried about you. She thought maybe she should have helped you to your car or something." "How thoughtful of her," Emma said. "And I suppose she also told you that she's pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Richard, we'll discuss this when I get home," he said finally. "No, we won't, because you're not coming home tonight. I'm changing the locks." "You can't change the locks on my house. Watch me." Emma hung up. Jake stared at his sister with new respect. "That was well handled." "I'm done being a victim," Emma said firmly. "Richard made his choice when he decided to start a family with Vanessa. Now I'm making mine. What do you need from me?" Emma looked at the security footage still playing on Jake's tablet, then at the police paperwork Dr. Mitchell had given her for reporting the assault. "I need you to help me protect Grace and myself. And I need you to help me make sure Vanessa Hoffman faces consequences for what she did." Jake smiled grimly. It was the same smile he'd worn when planning military operations, and it had never failed to worry his enemies. "Consider it done." As they left the hospital, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The absolute certainty that she was no longer alone in this fight. Her millionaire ex-husband might have money and lawyers, but she had something more valuable. She had a brother who understood exactly how to wage war. Vanessa would never do something like that. Richard James Morrison sat in his corner office on the 32nd floor of the Morrison building, staring out at the city skyline while his world crumbled around him. At 32, he'd built Morrison Tech Solutions into a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, but right now he felt like everything was spinning out of control. His phone had been ringing nonstop since Emma's call from the hospital. First his insurance company, asking about an emergency room visit. Then his mother, Patricia Morrison, who'd somehow heard about family drama from one of her society friends. Now Vanessa was calling every 10 minutes, increasingly frantic. "Mr. Morrison?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Hoffman is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Richard straightened his tie and composed himself. Vanessa couldn't have actually attacked Emma. The very idea was absurd. Vanessa was refined, educated, sophisticated. She managed his company's entire marketing department with professional competence. She wasn't the type of woman who got into physical altercations in parking garages. Send her in. Vanessa swept through his office door in a cloud of expensive perfume, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. Her makeup had been reapplied recently, but not quite perfectly, and her hands were shaking as she approached his desk. "Richard, thank God," she breathed, rushing around his desk to embrace him. "I've been so worried. Is Emma all right? When I saw her fall in the parking garage, I was horrified." Richard held her at arm's length, studying her face. "Fall? Emma said you pushed her." "Pushed her?" Vanessa's eyes widened in apparent shock. "Richard, I would never lay a hand on a pregnant woman. I was trying to talk to her, to explain that our relationship isn't just some sordid affair. I thought maybe if she understood how much we love each other, she might be willing to consider an amicable divorce." "And what happened?" "She got hysterical, started screaming at me, calling me names. I tried to calm her down, but she was so agitated that she stumbled and fell. I felt terrible about it." Vanessa's voice broke convincingly. "I wanted to help her up, but she told me to stay away from her. I thought maybe I should give her space to compose herself." Richard felt relief wash over him. This version made so much more sense. Emma had been increasingly emotional throughout the pregnancy, prone to mood swings and irrational outbursts. Pregnancy hormones could make women paranoid and unstable. His own mother had warned him about this. "She called the police," Richard said, watching Vanessa's reaction carefully. Vanessa paled. "The police? But why? I told you she fell. I didn't touch her." "She says you hit her with your purse. That's insane. Why would I do something like that?" Vanessa moved closer to him, her voice taking on the pleading tone that always made him want to protect her. "Richard, you know me. I'm not violent. I've never hurt anyone in my life." Richard pulled her into his arms, breathing in her familiar scent. Vanessa was everything Emma wasn't. Ambitious, passionate, exciting. She understood his business, supported his goals, and didn't spend their conversations talking about baby names and nursery decorations. "I know," he murmured against her hair. "Emma's just looking for someone to blame for her own clumsiness. The pregnancy has made her unstable." Vanessa pulled back to look at him, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "There's something else, Richard. Something I need to tell you." A chill ran down Richard's spine. "What?" "I'm pregnant." Richard stared at her, his mind racing. Pregnant. Vanessa was pregnant, which meant, how long? 10 weeks. I just found out for certain yesterday. Vanessa searched his face anxiously. "I know this complicates things, but Richard, this could be perfect for us. We could start fresh, build the family we've always talked about." Richard sank into his desk chair, trying to process this information. 2 pregnant women, 2 babies, 2 completely different futures stretching out before him. "Richard?" Vanessa's voice was small, uncertain. "Say something." "I don't know what to say. This changes everything." "It doesn't have to. You were already planning to leave Emma after her baby was born. Your lawyer said it would be better financially to wait until then. Now we just have additional motivation to move forward with our plans." Richard looked up at her sharply. "What plans?" Vanessa seemed to realize she'd said too much. "I just meant, we've talked about being together openly, about not having to sneak around anymore. With both babies coming, it makes sense to formalize our relationship. Vanessa, I need time to think about this." "Of course, I understand. But Richard, there's one more thing. Emma knows about us now. She knows about the baby. If we're going to handle this situation, we need to do it carefully." Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and felt his blood pressure spike. "What is it?" Vanessa asked. "Emma, she's changed the locks on the house." Vanessa's expression shifted subtly, a flash of something that might have been satisfaction crossing her features before she composed herself into concern. "She can't do that. It's your house. Technically, it's our house. We're married." Richard stood and began pacing. "This is getting out of hand. First the police, now this. Emma's trying to create a public scandal that could damage my business reputation. Maybe that's exactly what she wants," Vanessa said quietly. "Think about it, Richard. If she can make you look bad publicly, she'll have more leverage in a divorce settlement. She's not as naive as you think she is. Richard stopped pacing. He'd never considered that Emma might be playing a strategic game. But Vanessa was right. Emma had shown surprising cunning in changing the lock so quickly. And calling the police over what was obviously an accident showed a level of calculated manipulation he hadn't expected from his wife. "You might be right," he said slowly. "Emma's always been more clever than she lets on." Vanessa moved to the window, looking out at the city. "There's something else you should know. When I was trying to calm Emma down in the parking garage, she said some things. About your finances, about the business. It sounded like she's been going through your records." "What kind of things?" "She mentioned specific restaurants where we've had dinner, hotel charges from your business trips. She has details, Richard. Someone's been helping her investigate your activities." Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. If Emma had been systematically documenting his affair, if she had evidence of his relationship with Vanessa, she could use that against him in divorce proceedings. "I need to call my lawyer," he said. "That's probably smart. But Richard, there's one more thing we need to discuss." Vanessa turned back to him, her expression serious. "My condition, the pregnancy. If this situation becomes public, if there's a court battle, the stress could be dangerous for the baby." Richard felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever his feelings about Emma's pregnancy, this baby was different. This baby represented his future with Vanessa, his chance at the life he really wanted. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "I'll handle Emma. I'll make sure this doesn't turn into a public spectacle." Vanessa smiled, but there was something cold in her expression. "I know you will. You always protect the people you love." As Vanessa left his office, Richard tried to focus on damage control. He called his lawyer, scheduled an emergency meeting, and began planning his response to Emma's accusations. But part of his mind kept circling back to something Vanessa had said. Emma had fallen in the parking garage, but Vanessa had known specific details about Emma's investigation into their affair. Details that suggested their encounter hadn't been the chance meeting Vanessa had described. Richard pushed the thought away. Vanessa loved him. She was carrying his child. She would never deliberately hurt Emma or lie to him about something so serious. But as he stared out at the city skyline, Richard couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Something that could change everything he thought he knew about the women in his life. 3 floors down, in his building security office, Jake Samuel Carter was reviewing footage that would soon prove Richard's faith in Vanessa was catastrophically misplaced. But Richard didn't know that yet. For now, he was still living in a world where his mistress was innocent, his wife was unstable, and his biggest problem was managing a public relations nightmare. That illusion wouldn't last much longer. This isn't just assault. This is attempted harm to an unborn child. Detective Lisa Reynolds had seen plenty of domestic violence cases in her 15 years with the police department, but there was something particularly disturbing about the security footage playing on her computer screen. The calculated nature of the attack, the deliberate targeting of a pregnant woman's belly, the casual way the perpetrator walked away afterward. It all spoke to a level of premeditation that elevated this beyond a simple assault. "Mrs. Morrison, I want you to walk me through the events again," Detective Reynolds said, her voice gentle but professional. "Start from when you left your doctor's appointment." Emma sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair across from the detective's desk, Jake beside her for moral support. She had already told this story 3 times, but she understood the need for consistency in her account. "I finished my appointment with Dr. Mitchell around 2:30. The appointment ran long because we had to do an ultrasound to check on the baby's position. I was feeling good about everything. Grace is healthy and developing normally." "Grace is your daughter's name?" "Yes. We're expecting her in about 8 weeks." Emma's hand moved protectively to her belly. "I walked to my car in the parking garage, level 2, section C. I was looking for my keys when I heard someone call out." "And you recognized the voice?" "Immediately, Vanessa Hoffman. I've met her several times at company functions. She works in marketing at my husband's firm." Detective Reynolds made notes. "What was her demeanor when she first approached you?" "Angry, hostile. She told me to get away from her husband, called me a pathetic cow. But there was something else, too. She seemed prepared, like she'd been planning what to say." Explain what you mean by prepared. Emma glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. She knew specific details about Richard's plans. She said his lawyer had advised him to wait until after the baby was born to file for divorce because of better financial terms. She knew things about our marriage that Richard wouldn't normally discuss with his mistress unless what? Unless they were planning a future together that involved getting rid of me and the baby. Detective Reynolds studied the police report. You mentioned that Ms. Hoffman made specific threats about your unborn child. She said Richard never wanted the baby anyway. When she hit me with her purse, she aimed directly at my stomach. She said maybe I'd get the message after I couldn't stay on my feet. Emma's voice remained steady, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask this question. Is there any possibility that this encounter was accidental? That Ms. Hoffman might have been trying to have a conversation with you that escalated unexpectedly? Emma looked directly at Detective Reynolds. Watch the security footage again. Pay attention to how she positions herself before I arrive, how she waits for me to be alone, how she targets my pregnancy specifically. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was planned. Detective Reynolds pulled up the enhanced footage Jake's security company had provided. They watched in silence as Vanessa emerged from behind the pillar, confronted Emma, and delivered the calculated attack. Mr. Carter, your security company enhanced this footage. Can you walk me through what we're seeing? Jake leaned forward, switching into professional mode. Vanessa Hoffman arrives in the parking garage at approximately 2:15, 15 minutes before Emma's appointment was scheduled to end. She positions herself behind Pillar 7, which gives her a clear view of Emma's car, but keeps her hidden from the main traffic flow. How would she know when the appointment would end? That's the disturbing part. She's clearly been monitoring Emma's schedule. Dr. Mitchell's office confirms that Emma's appointments are always scheduled for the same time slot every 2 weeks, and they typically run 30 to 45 minutes. Vanessa timed this perfectly. Detective Reynolds made more notes. What else does the footage tell us? Watch her body language when she approaches Emma. This isn't someone who's emotionally distraught or acting on impulse. Her movements are controlled, deliberate. She's mentally rehearsed this confrontation. Chroniyur Dirnom. They watched as Vanessa swung her purse at Emma's belly with clear intent. The handbag weighs approximately 3 pounds based on its size and designer specifications, Jake continued. When applied with force to a pregnant woman's abdomen, it could potentially cause complications or miscarriage. The fact that she aimed specifically for the pregnancy makes this attempted assault on an unborn child. Detective Reynolds froze the footage at the moment of impact. And after Mrs. Morrison falls, Vanessa doesn't check on her welfare, doesn't call for help, doesn't show any concern about the fact that she just knocked down a pregnant woman. She adjusts her appearance and leaves the scene. That's not the behavior of someone who feels remorse about an accident. Emma watched the detective review the evidence, hoping she would see what seemed obvious to everyone else. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an emotional outburst. This was a deliberate attack on her and her unborn child. Mrs. Morrison, has your husband seen this footage? No. I told him about the attack, but he dismissed it. He said I was being dramatic and that Vanessa would never do something like that. He believes I fell and imagined the rest. Have you spoken to Ms. Hoffman since the incident? She contacted Richard immediately after it happened. According to him, she claimed I fell and that she tried to help me. He believes her version of events. Detective Reynolds closed the file and looked at Emma directly. Mrs. Morrison, based on the evidence we have, the security footage, your injuries, the premeditated nature of the attack, I'm going to arrest Ms. Hoffman on charges of aggravated assault. The fact that you're pregnant elevates this to a felony. Emma felt a surge of relief and vindication. Thank you. However, I need to warn you that this is likely going to become complicated. Ms. Hoffman will undoubtedly hire an expensive lawyer. There may be attempts to discredit your testimony or suggest that you're an unstable pregnant woman seeking attention. Are you prepared for that? Emma looked at Jake, then back at Detective Reynolds. Detective, 3 hours ago, I thought my biggest problem was a cheating husband. Now I know that his mistress deliberately tried to hurt my unborn child, and that my husband is so committed to protecting her that he's willing to gaslight me about what happened. I've learned a lot about what I'm capable of handling in a very short time. And your husband? How do you think he'll react when Ms. Hoffman is arrested? He'll probably try to protect her. He'll hire lawyers, claim it's all a misunderstanding, try to make me look like the villain. Emma's voice hardened. But that's his choice. I'm done protecting his reputation at the expense of my safety and my daughter's welfare. Detective Reynolds stood up. I'll have officers pick up Ms. Hoffman within the hour. You'll need to come in tomorrow to sign your formal statement. Mr. Carter, thank you for providing the security footage so quickly. As they left the police station, Jake put his arm around Emma's shoulders. How are you feeling? Scared, relieved, angry, determined. Emma looked up at her brother. Jake, there's something I need to tell you. Something I realized while we were talking to Detective Reynolds. What? Vanessa knew about my doctor's appointments. She knew the timing, the location, everything. But I never told Richard my appointment schedule, and I certainly never told Vanessa. Emma stopped walking. Someone's been monitoring my activities. Someone's been watching me. Jake's expression grew grim. Or someone has access to your medical records, your calendar, your personal information. Richard has access to all of that through our shared accounts and insurance, which means either Richard helped plan this attack or Vanessa has been systematically invading your privacy for weeks or months. Jake pulled out his phone. I'm calling Jimmy. We need to do a complete security sweep of your house, your car, your phone, everything. If someone's been watching you, we need to find out how. As Jake made his calls, Emma stood on the courthouse steps and felt the last of her illusions about her marriage finally crumble. This wasn't just about Richard having an affair anymore. This was about a deliberate campaign to eliminate her from his life, potentially including harm to their unborn child. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Emma didn't feel helpless. She had proof, she had support, and she had a plan. Vanessa Hoffman was about to learn that attacking the wrong pregnant woman could destroy more than just a pregnancy. It could destroy an entire life. 2 babies, 2 women, 1 lying, cheating husband. The words echoed in Emma's mind as she sat in Jake's truck outside Morrison Tech Solutions, watching her husband's office building through tinted windows. It had been 6 hours since Detective Reynolds had arrested Vanessa Hoffman, and Richard's response had been exactly what Emma had predicted: denial, anger, and an immediate call to his lawyer. Are you sure you want to do this? Jake asked for the 3rd time. We could wait until tomorrow, give you time to process everything that's happened. I need to see his face when he tries to explain this, Emma replied, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. I need to hear him try to justify why his mistress knew my medical schedule well enough to ambush me. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Jimmy Thompson. Vanessa made bail 2 hours ago. Her lawyers already filed motions claiming you're an unstable pregnant woman who's fabricating evidence to secure a better divorce settlement. Of course she did. Emma's voice was bitter. What else did Jimmy find? Her phone records show she's been calling Richard every day for the past 2 months, sometimes multiple times per day. The day of the attack, she called him immediately afterward. That contradicts her story about being worried about helping you. And? Jake hesitated. There's something else. Jimmy ran a deeper background check on Vanessa. She's not just pregnant, Emma. She's been seeing a specialist. Emma turned to stare at her brother. What kind of specialist? High-risk pregnancy. She's been having complications. Spotting, elevated blood pressure, threatened miscarriage. Her medical records show she was advised to avoid stress and physical exertion. So she's risking her own pregnancy by attacking me? That's what makes this even more disturbing. She was so desperate to eliminate you as competition that she was willing to risk her own baby's health to do it. Emma absorbed this information, feeling another piece of the puzzle click into place. Jake, I want to talk to her. Absolutely not. Not alone, with you there, in a public place, somewhere safe. I need to understand why she did this. Jake studied his sister's face. Emma, you're not thinking clearly. You've been through a traumatic experience today. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Emma's voice was firm. For 8 months, I've been making excuses for Richard's behavior, blaming myself for our marriage problems, trying to be the perfect pregnant wife. Today I learned that while I was doing that, his mistress was planning to attack me and potentially cause a miscarriage. So I want to look her in the eye and ask her why. I want to understand how someone gets to the point where they think assaulting a pregnant woman is acceptable. And I want her to know that I'm not going away quietly. Jake was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks. If we do this, it's going to be completely controlled. Public location, recording everything, minimal contact. And the moment she shows any sign of aggression or instability, we leave. Agreed. And you're not going to engage with any emotional manipulation or attempts to justify what she did. I'm not looking for closure, Jake. I'm looking for information. I want to know what Richard told her about me, about our marriage, about his plans. Knowledge is power. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in the coffee shop on the ground floor of Vanessa's apartment building. Jake had chosen the location carefully. Multiple security cameras, plenty of witnesses, easy access to exits. He'd also arranged for Jimmy to monitor from a corner table across the room. Vanessa arrived exactly on time, looking pale and shaken but still impeccably dressed. Her designer handbag, the same one she'd used as a weapon that morning, was clutched tightly in her manicured fingers. "Emma," she said, sliding into the booth across from them. "I'm surprised you wanted to meet." "I'm surprised you agreed to come," Emma replied calmly, "given that you're facing felony assault charges." Vanessa's composure slipped slightly. "That's all a misunderstanding. My lawyer says the charges won't stick. Security footage can be misinterpreted." "Can it?" Jake spoke for the first time, his voice deadly quiet. "Because the footage I watched showed you deliberately targeting my sister's pregnant belly with a 3-pound handbag. That seems pretty unambiguous to me." Vanessa glanced nervously at Jake, clearly recognizing the threat he represented. "And you are?" "Jake Carter, Emma's brother. I run the security company that provided the footage to the police." The color drained from Vanessa's face as she realized the implications. You work in security?" "I am security, former Marine, current CEO of Carter Security Solutions. We protect people who can't protect themselves." Jake's smile was razor sharp. "People like pregnant women who get attacked in parking garages." Vanessa turned back to Emma, clearly hoping for a more sympathetic audience. "Emma, I want you to know that I never intended for you to get hurt. Things just got out of hand." "Did they?" Emma's voice remained calm. "Because I've been thinking about our conversation in the parking garage, and there were some very specific details you mentioned. Details about Richard's divorce plans that seemed too precise to be casual knowledge." "I don't know what you mean." "You said Richard's lawyer advised him to wait until after the baby was born for better financial terms. You knew about his business trips, his spending patterns, his feelings about the pregnancy. That's not pillow talk, Vanessa. That's strategic planning." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. "Richard and I discuss everything. We don't have secrets from each other." "Unlike his marriage to me?" "That's different." "How?" Vanessa leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgent tone. "Emma, you have to understand. Richard never wanted that baby. He told me from the beginning that the pregnancy was a mistake, that you'd trapped him by getting pregnant when he was trying to focus on expanding the business." Jake placed a restraining hand on Emma's arm as he felt her tense. "Keep talking," he said to Vanessa. "He said you'd become obsessed with having a baby, that you'd stop being the woman he married. You didn't support his business goals anymore, didn't want to travel or socialize or be part of his professional life. All you cared about was nurseries and baby names and turning him into a suburban father." Emma felt each word like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain composed. "And you believe that justified attacking me?" "I wasn't trying to attack you. I was trying to make you understand that holding on to Richard was pointless. He's already emotionally committed to someone else, to me, and to our baby." The words hung in the air like a confession. "Your baby," Emma repeated quietly. Vanessa's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Yes, Richard and I are expecting our first child together, a child he actually wants, that we planned together." "Planned together," Jake echoed. "When did you plan this pregnancy, Vanessa?" "What do you mean?" "When did you and Richard decide to have a baby together? Before or after you found out Emma was pregnant?" Vanessa realized she'd revealed too much. "That's not... It's complicated." "I don't think it's complicated at all," Emma said softly. "I think Richard panicked when I got pregnant because it interfered with whatever future he'd promised you. So you decided that if I lost the baby, the problem would be solved. That's not true, isn't it? Emma pulled out her phone and opened her calendar app. Let's see. You've been having an affair with Richard for 8 months. You got pregnant 10 weeks ago. I'm 31 weeks pregnant, which means you conceived your baby right around the time Richard would have been feeling trapped by my pregnancy becoming obviously visible. Jake watched Vanessa's face carefully as Emma laid out the timeline. The woman was clearly struggling with how much to admit. The timing is interesting, Jake added conversationally. It suggests that either you got pregnant accidentally at a very convenient time, or you got pregnant deliberately to give Richard an alternative to the family he already had. You don't understand what it's like, Vanessa said desperately. Emma, Richard loves me. He wants to build a life with me. Your pregnancy was just an obstacle to overcome. Emma stared at this woman who had attacked her and their unborn children with such casual cruelty and felt something cold settle in her chest. You're right, Emma said quietly. I don't understand what it's like to be the kind of person who would deliberately harm an innocent baby to get what I want. I don't understand how someone gets to the point where they think attempted murder is an acceptable solution to relationship problems. It wasn't attempted murder. You deliberately targeted my pregnant belly with a heavy object, hoping to cause a miscarriage. What would you call it? Vanessa stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. I call it fighting for the man I love and the family we deserve to have together. The coffee shop went quiet as other patrons turned to stare at the pregnant woman having a breakdown near the window. Vanessa, Emma said, standing as well, I hope your baby survives your narcissistic delusions. Because one day that child is going to ask you why their father is in prison for conspiracy to commit assault, and you're going to have to explain that you valued your relationship with a married man more than human life. Vanessa stared at Emma in shock. Prison? Richard isn't going to prison. He didn't do anything. Emma smiled coldly. He didn't have to do anything directly. He gave you my medical schedule, my personal information, and his blessing to eliminate the obstacles to your relationship. That makes him an accessory to attempted assault on an unborn child. As they walked away from the coffee shop, Jake put his arm around Emma's shoulders. How do you feel? Like I've been married to a stranger for 4 years, Emma replied, and like I'm about to become a single mother to the daughter of a man who never wanted her to exist. And Emma looked up at her brother, and Jake saw something new in her eyes. Not just determination or anger, but a kind of fierce maternal protectiveness that reminded him of their own mother. And like Grace and I are going to be just fine without him. Time to show Richard who he's really been dealing with. Jake Carter sat in his security office at 3 in the morning, surrounded by monitors displaying feeds from cameras throughout the Morrison building. For the past 4 hours, he'd been systematically reviewing 8 months of archived footage, building a case that would destroy Richard Morrison's life as thoroughly as Richard had destroyed Emma's. The irony wasn't lost on him. Richard had unknowingly hired the brother of the woman he was betraying to protect his business interests. Now that same security system was going to be used to expose every detail of his elaborate deception. Jimmy Thompson looked up from his computer, where he'd been analyzing financial records. You need to see this, Jake. Richard's been more than just unfaithful. He's been embezzling. Show me. Jimmy pulled up a spreadsheet on the main monitor. Look at these expense reports over the past 8 months. Private dinners with Vanessa charged as client entertainment. Hotel rooms for overnight business meetings that correspond exactly with their affair timeline. Medical appointments for Vanessa billed as company health seminars. Jake studied the numbers. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $250,000 in personal expenses charged to the company. But it gets worse. Jimmy clicked to another screen. He's been using company credit cards to pay for Vanessa's apartment lease, her car payments, even her designer handbags, including the one she used to assault Emma. That's not just adultery, Jake realized. That's fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of corporate funds. The board of directors could file criminal charges. It gets even better. Want to know how Vanessa knew Emma's medical schedule? Jake raised an eyebrow. Richard's been accessing Emma's medical records through their shared insurance account and forwarding the information to Vanessa. Look at this. Jimmy pulled up a series of emails. Every time Emma had a doctor's appointment, Richard would send Vanessa a message with the date, time, and location. He's been helping her monitor Emma's activities for months. Jake felt his anger crystallize into something much more dangerous. Strategic planning. Jimmy, I need you to prepare 3 separate evidence packages, one for the police, one for the board of directors, and one for Emma's divorce lawyer. Already on it. But Jake, there's something else. Something that's going to make this even more complicated. What? Jimmy pulled up another set of records. Richard's been researching ways to challenge paternity of Emma's baby. He's been consulting with lawyers about forcing DNA tests, claiming the child might not be his, laying groundwork to avoid child support obligations. Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. Emma's been faithful their entire marriage. He knows that baby is his. It doesn't matter if he knows it. It matters if he can create enough doubt to reduce his financial obligations. Look at this consultation summary. Jimmy highlighted a document. His lawyer advised him that if he could prove infidelity or create reasonable doubt about paternity, he could significantly reduce alimony and child support payments. So he's been setting up Emma to look unstable and unfaithful while positioning himself as the injured party. Exactly. The timing of everything makes sense now. He waits until after Grace is born to file for divorce, claims Emma was mentally unstable during pregnancy, suggests she had an affair that resulted in a child that might not be his, and walks away with minimal financial obligations while starting fresh with Vanessa. Jake leaned back in his chair, processing the full scope of Richard's plan. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a coordinated campaign to destroy Emma's credibility, eliminate her financial security, and potentially separate her from her own child. There's one more thing, Jimmy said quietly. The consultation notes mention something called eliminating obstacles to dissolution. The lawyer's notes suggest that if Emma suffered a pregnancy loss, it would simplify the divorce proceedings considerably. Jake went very still. Are you saying Richard's lawyer recommended terminating the pregnancy? I'm saying the consultation notes discuss various scenarios for simplifying divorce proceedings, and pregnancy loss is listed as one of the factors that would be advantageous to the client's position. Jake stood up and began pacing, his military training automatically shifting into mission planning mode. Richard didn't just allow Vanessa to attack Emma. He facilitated it. He gave her Emma's schedule, he discussed the legal advantages of pregnancy loss, and he provided financial support for a woman he knew was unstable enough to assault a pregnant woman. That makes him an accessory to attempted assault and conspiracy to commit harm to an unborn child. It makes him a lot more than that. Jake pulled out his phone and began making calls. Jimmy, I need you to secure all of this evidence immediately. Multiple backups, multiple locations, and I want copies delivered to Detective Reynolds within the hour. Oh, what's the plan? Jake smiled grimly. Richard Morrison thinks he's been playing chess with Emma. He doesn't realize he's been playing against me. 20 minutes later, Jake was sitting in his truck outside Emma's house, watching his sister move around her kitchen through the window. She was making tea at 3:30 in the morning, unable to sleep after everything that had happened. He could see her occasionally stopping to rest her hand on her pregnant belly, talking quietly to the baby that Richard had never wanted. His phone rang. Detective Reynolds. Mr. Carter, I got your evidence package. We need to talk. I'm listening. This changes everything. We're not just looking at assault anymore. With the evidence you've provided showing premeditation and coordination between Mr. Morrison and Ms. Hoffman, we're looking at conspiracy charges, potentially federal charges if we can prove use of electronic communications to coordinate the attack. What do you need from me? I need you to understand that when we arrest Mr. Morrison, this is going to become a media circus. Your sister is going to be under enormous scrutiny. Are you prepared for that? Jake looked at Emma through the window, watching her strength and determination, even in her most vulnerable moments. Detective, my sister has already survived her husband's betrayal, his mistress's attack, and the discovery that the father of her child planned to destroy her life for financial gain. I think she can handle whatever the media throws at her. And you? This is going to expose your role in gathering evidence against your sister's husband. There could be accusations of entrapment, invasion of privacy, corporate espionage. My security company had legitimate contracts with multiple buildings in the downtown area. Richard Morrison hired me to protect his interests. I've simply documented evidence of crimes committed within my surveillance areas. Everything I've gathered is legal and admissible. Mr. Carter, there's something else you should know. Ms. Hoffman is claiming that Mrs. Morrison provoked the attack by threatening her pregnancy. She's saying your sister deliberately tried to cause her stress to harm her baby. Jake felt his temper flare. That's absurd. I know, but it's going to be her defense strategy. She's going to claim that Mrs. Morrison is the aggressor, that she was defending herself and her unborn child from threats. The affair, the pregnancy, everything becomes ammunition for painting your sister as an unstable woman who attacked her husband's pregnant mistress. Do they have any evidence supporting that story? None. But they have expensive lawyers and a lot of motivation to discredit Mrs. Morrison's testimony. This is going to be a fight. Jake thought about everything Emma had been through, everything she was still facing. A complicated divorce, single motherhood, rebuilding her life from scratch. She deserved better than to spend the next year battling lies and manipulation in court. Detective Reynolds, what if I told you I could provide additional evidence that would make their defense strategy impossible to maintain? What kind of evidence? The kind that shows Richard Morrison not only knew about the attack in advance, but actively encouraged it by discussing the legal benefits of pregnancy loss with his divorce attorney. There was a long pause. Mr. Carter, if you have evidence of that level of premeditation, we're not just talking about assault and conspiracy anymore. We're talking about attempted murder. I know, the question is, are you prepared to prosecute a millionaire ex-husband for conspiracy to commit attempted murder of his wife and unborn child? Mr. Carter, if the evidence supports those charges, I'll prosecute anyone regardless of their bank account. Good, because Richard Morrison is about to learn that money can't buy you protection from the consequences of your actions. As Jake ended the call, he looked at Emma's house one more time. Tomorrow, her world was going to change again, but this time, it would be changing in her favor. Richard Morrison had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate plan to destroy Emma's life. He'd hired the wrong man to protect his secrets. Now those secrets were about to destroy him instead. Surprised to see me, brother-in-law? Richard Morrison looked up from his computer as Jake Carter entered his office without knocking. It was 8:30 in the morning, and Richard was already dealing with calls from reporters asking about Vanessa's arrest. The last thing he needed was his head of security bothering him with routine matters. Jake, whatever security issues you need to discuss can wait. I'm dealing with a family crisis right now. No, and actually, the security issues I need to discuss are directly related to your family crisis. Jake closed the office door behind him and engaged the lock. Mind if I sit down? Something in Jake's tone made Richard look up more carefully. There was a cold professionalism in the other man's voice that Richard had never heard before. What's this about? Jake settled into the chair across from Richard's desk and pulled out a tablet. It's about 8 months of surveillance footage, financial records, and electronic communications that paint a very interesting picture of your extramarital activities. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Jake tapped the tablet screen, and suddenly the office's main monitor displayed crystal clear footage of Richard and Vanessa entering the Marriott downtown. March 15th, you charged this hotel room as client entertainment for a non-existent meeting with Peterson Industries. Richard stared at the screen, his mind racing. Jake, I can explain. Can you? Because I have 7 more instances of you and Ms. Hoffman using company funds for personal activities. Hotel rooms, restaurants, medical appointments, even the lease on her apartment. $250,000 in embezzled funds over 8 months. The monitor switched to a financial spreadsheet showing every fraudulent charge in detail. Richard felt his world beginning to crumble. How did you... Those records are confidential. Not when they involve potential criminal activity in buildings under my security contract. Jake's smile was razor sharp. But that's not the most interesting evidence I've gathered. The screen changed again, this time showing email correspondence between Richard and Vanessa. Richard watched in horror as his most incriminating messages were displayed for analysis. Emma's appointment is Thursday at 2:30, Memorial Medical Center, Level 2 parking. Jake read aloud. She usually takes 45 minutes and always parks in Section C. That's your email to Vanessa from last week, Richard. The same day Vanessa attacked my sister. Richard's blood turned to ice. Your sister? Emma Catherine Morrison. Your wife. My little sister. Jake leaned forward, and Richard saw something dangerous in his eyes. Did you really think you could destroy Emma's life without anyone noticing? Did you think you could embezzle from your own company, conspire to harm your pregnant wife, and get away with it? I never conspired to harm anyone. Jake tapped the tablet again. The monitor now showed consultation notes from Richard's divorce attorney. Client inquired about legal advantages of pregnancy loss and dissolution proceedings. Jake read. Advised that termination of pregnancy would simplify asset division and eliminate child support obligations. Your lawyer's notes from last month, Richard. The same month you started providing Vanessa with Emma's medical schedule. Richard stared at the evidence of his own words, feeling trapped. Those consultations are privileged, not when they involve conspiracy to commit criminal acts. Jake stood up, and Richard realized for the first time how physically imposing the former Marine actually was. You hired Vanessa to eliminate the obstacles to your new life together, your wife and your unborn daughter. That's not true. I never told Vanessa to hurt Emma. Didn't you? Jake pulled up another document. Text message from you to Vanessa, day of the attack. E knows about us. Handle it. Sent 30 minutes before she ambushed Emma in the parking garage. Richard remembered sending that text, but in his panic, he'd never considered how it might be interpreted. I meant talk to her. I meant explain the situation. Did you? Because Vanessa interpreted it as permission to assault a pregnant woman. And when Emma called you from the hospital, you immediately dismissed her account and protected Vanessa. That makes you an accessory after the fact. The office door chimed, and Richard's assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Morrison, there are some people here to see you. They say it's urgent. Richard looked at Jake, who was checking his watch with the satisfied expression of someone whose timing had worked out perfectly. Let them in, Jake said loudly enough for the assistant to hear. The door opened to admit Detective Reynolds, 2 uniformed officers, and 3 people Richard didn't recognize, but who carried themselves with the unmistakable authority of federal agents. Richard James Morrison, Detective Reynolds said formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, embezzlement of corporate funds, and accessory to attempted harm of an unborn child. As the detective read him his rights, Richard stared at Jake in shock. You planned this. You've been planning this the whole time. Actually, I've been protecting Emma the whole time. You hired me to provide security services, and that's exactly what I did. I secured evidence of criminal activity and turned it over to the appropriate authorities. One of the federal agents stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, we also have warrants for your electronic devices and financial records. The use of interstate communications to coordinate criminal activity brings this under federal jurisdiction. Richard felt the handcuffs close around his wrists as the full scope of his situation became clear. Jake, you don't understand. Emma will be financially ruined if this company fails. She'll lose everything. Jake's expression didn't change. Emma will be fine. She's got a brother who actually cares about her welfare, unlike her husband, who was apparently willing to have her and their baby killed for financial convenience. As the officers led Richard toward the door, he turned back desperately. The company needs leadership. You can't just... Actually, the board of directors has already voted to place the company under emergency management pending resolution of the criminal charges, Jake said calmly. Your employment has been terminated, your access to company assets has been revoked, and your stock options have been frozen. You can't do that. I didn't do anything. The board did, after reviewing evidence of your embezzlement and criminal conspiracy. Turns out corporate executives who steal company money and conspire to commit violent crimes aren't good for business. Richard was halfway to the elevator when he realized the final piece of Jake's trap. You were never just the head of security, were you? Jake smiled for the first time since entering the office. No, Richard. I was Emma's big brother, making sure his little sister was protected from men like you. As the elevator doors closed on Richard's shocked face, Jake turned to his tablet and sent a single text message to Emma. It's done. He can't hurt you anymore. 3 floors down, Emma was sitting in the lobby with her divorce attorney, Patricia Morrison, and Dr. Mitchell, who had insisted on being present to monitor Emma's stress levels during the arrest. She read Jake's text and felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for months. Richard Morrison had spent 8 months planning to destroy her life. Her brother had spent 8 months making sure that wouldn't happen. The difference between the two men couldn't have been more clear. For the first time since discovering Richard's affair, Emma allowed herself to believe that she and Grace were going to be all right. The board wants to see you now, Richard. The conference room at Morrison Tech Solutions had been transformed into something resembling a tribunal. The entire board of directors sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces grim as they reviewed the evidence packets Jake had prepared. Richard's empty chair at the head of the table served as a stark reminder of how quickly power could shift. Emma sat beside her divorce attorney, Sarah Chen, her hands folded over her pregnant belly as she watched the proceedings. At 32 weeks pregnant, every movement required careful consideration, but her mind was sharp and focused. This wasn't just about justice for the attack. This was about securing her daughter's future. "Let's begin," said Thomas Bradley, the board's senior member and Morrison Tech's founding investor. "Mr. Carter, please present your findings." Jake stood at the front of the room, every inch the professional security consultant. He'd prepared for this presentation as thoroughly as any military briefing, knowing that Emma's financial future depended on the board's decision. "Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 8 months, Richard Morrison has systematically embezzled corporate funds to support an extramarital affair, provided confidential employee information to unauthorized third parties, and conspired in the assault of a pregnant woman. The evidence is extensive and indisputable." The main screen displayed financial records showing Richard's fraudulent charges: hotel rooms, restaurant bills, medical appointments, rent payments, all charged to Morrison Tech under false pretenses. "The total amount of embezzled funds is $257,432, Jake continued. "This includes direct payments for his mistress's living expenses, medical care, and personal items, including the designer handbag she used to assault my sister." Board member Jessica Walsh raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, you mentioned assault. Can you clarify the company's liability in this matter?" Vanessa Hoffman's attack on Emma Morrison was facilitated by information Richard provided using company resources. He accessed confidential medical records through the company's insurance portal and forwarded scheduling information to enable the assault. This creates potential civil liability for Morrison Tech. The room was silent as board members absorbed the implications. A lawsuit from Emma could destroy the company's reputation and financial stability. "However," Jake continued, "Mrs. Morrison has no intention of pursuing civil action against Morrison Tech, provided the board takes appropriate action regarding Richard's criminal behavior and financial theft." Thomas Bradley looked at Emma directly. "Mrs. Morrison, would you care to address the board?" Emma stood carefully, one hand supporting her back. At 8 months pregnant, she cut an imposing figure, clearly vulnerable, but radiating quiet strength. "Gentlemen, ladies," she began, her voice steady and clear. "4 years ago, I married a man I thought was honorable. I supported his business goals, attended company functions, and tried to be the kind of wife who enhanced his professional reputation." She paused, looking around the table at faces she'd seen at countless corporate dinners and charity events. "I discovered his affair 2 months ago. I learned about his financial theft yesterday. But it wasn't until his mistress attacked me and my unborn child that I understood the true scope of my husband's betrayal." The room was completely silent. Richard Morrison embezzled over $250,000 from this company to support his affair. He used corporate resources to facilitate assault on a pregnant woman. He conspired with his mistress to eliminate what he saw as obstacles to his new life. Emma's voice grew stronger. "But this isn't just about Richard's crimes. This is about Morrison Tech's future. This company has excellent people, innovative projects, and strong client relationships. It doesn't deserve to be destroyed by one man's selfishness and criminal behavior." Jessica Walsh leaned forward. "What are you proposing, Mrs. Morrison?" "I'm proposing that Morrison Tech survive and thrive without Richard. I'm proposing that his stock holdings be liquidated to repay the embezzled funds and provide restitution to the company. And I'm proposing that this board choose leaders who understand that integrity isn't just a corporate buzzword. It's a fundamental requirement for success." Thomas Bradley nodded approvingly. "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I waive any claims against Morrison Tech for Richard's actions. The company's liability ends with his termination and prosecution." The board members exchanged glances. Emma was offering them a way out of a potentially catastrophic situation, while holding Richard fully accountable for his crimes. Mrs. Morrison, said board member David Kim, what assurance do we have that you won't change your mind about pursuing civil action? Sarah Chen stood up. My client is prepared to sign a comprehensive settlement agreement that protects Morrison Tech from any future claims related to Richard Morrison's criminal activity. In exchange, the company will provide full cooperation with criminal prosecution and agree to the stock liquidation proposal. How do we know Richard will agree to liquidate his holdings? Jake spoke up. Richard's assets are being frozen pending criminal trial. The alternative to voluntary liquidation is having his stock holdings seized as proceeds from criminal activity. He'll cooperate. The conference room door opened and Richard entered, flanked by two officers and his attorney. He'd been released on bail but looked haggard and defeated. His expensive suit couldn't disguise the fact that his world had collapsed in 24 hours. Richard, Thomas Bradley said formally, this board has voted to terminate your employment and revoke your corporate privileges effective immediately. We're also voting to pursue full criminal prosecution for embezzlement and conspiracy. Richard stared at the board members, people he'd worked with for years, people he'd considered friends. You can't do this. I built this company. No, Jessica Walsh said firmly. You nearly destroyed this company, and you definitely destroyed any trust we had in your leadership. The evidence against you is overwhelming, David Kim added. The financial theft, the conspiracy, the assault facilitation. We have no choice but to protect the company's interests. Richard's lawyer whispered something in his ear, and Richard's shoulders sagged in defeat. What do you want from me? Emma stood up again, facing the man she'd been married to for 4 years. I want you to sign documents liquidating your Morrison Tech holdings to repay the money you stole. I want you to cooperate fully with the criminal prosecution, and I want you to stay away from me and my daughter. Emma, please, we can work this out. We don't have to destroy everything we built together. Emma's voice was ice cold. We didn't build anything together, Richard. You built a lie while I lived in it. The difference is that I'm strong enough to survive the truth. Richard looked around the room desperately. You're all making a mistake. Without me, this company will fail. You need my leadership, my vision, my client relationships. Thomas Bradley stood up. Richard, this company's vision doesn't include embezzlement, adultery, and conspiracy to commit assault. We'll take our chances without you. Mrs. Morrison, Jessica Walsh said, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for Richard's actions and thank you for your gracious handling of this situation. Morrison Tech owes you a debt of gratitude. Emma nodded. Just make sure it never happens again, and make sure that justice is served. As the officers led Richard away for the second time in 2 days, he turned back to Emma with one final desperate plea. Emma, I never meant for Vanessa to hurt you. You have to believe that. Emma looked at him with something that might have been pity. Richard, you spent months planning to eliminate me and our daughter from your life. The only thing you never meant was to get caught. The conference room door closed, and Emma felt a chapter of her life end definitively. But as she looked at the supportive faces around the table, Jake, her attorney, even the board members who were choosing justice over corporate loyalty, she realized something important. This wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of the life she was going to build for herself and Grace. Thomas Bradley cleared his throat. Mrs. Morrison, if I may, the board would like to discuss one more matter with you. Emma looked surprised. Of course. Morrison Tech is going to need interim leadership while we search for Richard's replacement. We're prepared to offer you a consulting position to help transition the company through this crisis. Your MBA and your intimate knowledge of the business operations would be invaluable. Emma blinked in surprise. I haven't worked in business for 4 years. No, but you've been watching this company's operations from the inside. You know the clients, you understand the corporate culture, and frankly, you've shown more leadership in the past 24 hours than Richard showed in the past year. Jake smiled proudly as he watched his sister consider the offer. Emma's always been the brains of that family. Richard just never realized it. I'm about to have a baby, Emma pointed out. I can't commit to a demanding schedule right now. We're talking about part-time consulting work that you could do from home after Grace is born. Jessica Walsh explained. Project management, client relationship oversight, strategic planning, the kind of work that requires intelligence and judgment, not physical presence. Emma looked at her brother, who nodded encouragingly. It would give you financial independence, he said quietly. Your own income, your own professional identity. Think about it, Thomas Bradley said. You don't have to decide today, but the offer stands whenever you're ready. As the meeting concluded, Emma found herself walking out of Morrison Tech feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope for the future. Not just survival, but actual prosperity and professional fulfillment. Jake drove her home in comfortable silence, both of them processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Richard's career was over, his freedom was in jeopardy, and his financial future was in ruins. Meanwhile, Emma had been offered a path to rebuild her life on her own terms. How do you feel? Jake asked as they pulled into Emma's driveway. Like I've been holding my breath for 8 months and can finally exhale, Emma replied. And like Grace is going to grow up knowing that her mother never gave up fighting for what was right. Richard's going to prison, isn't he? Detective Reynolds thinks he'll plea bargain to avoid trial. Probably 3 to 5 years for the embezzlement and conspiracy charges. Vanessa will likely get 2 years plus probation. Emma nodded, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. I never wanted to destroy Richard's life. I just wanted him to stop trying to destroy mine. He destroyed his own life the moment he decided that his mistress and his money were more important than his pregnant wife. You just made sure there were consequences for that choice. As they sat in the driveway, Emma felt Grace kick strongly, as if the baby was responding to the reduced stress in her mother's body. She's active today, Emma said, smiling as she felt her daughter moving. Grace knows her mom just won a major victory. She's celebrating. Emma laughed, and Jake realized it was the first time he'd heard his sister truly laugh in months. Jake, I need to ask you something. Anything. How long have you been planning this? The investigation, the evidence gathering, the coordination with the police and the board? Jake was quiet for a moment. The night you called me from the parking garage, when I saw what Vanessa had done to you, when I realized Richard was protecting her instead of you, I knew this was war. And in war, you use every weapon at your disposal. You used your security company to destroy your own client. I used my security company to protect my sister and my niece from people who wanted to hurt them. Richard stopped being my client the moment he became a threat to my family. Emma reached over and squeezed her brother's hand. Thank you for everything, for believing me, for protecting us, for making sure that justice was served. Thank you for being strong enough to fight back. A year ago, you might have just accepted Richard's version of events and blamed yourself. Today, you stood up in front of that board and demanded accountability. Grace is going to be proud of her mom. As Emma walked into her house now, not Richard's, she felt the weight of the past 24 hours, settling into something like peace. The man who had betrayed her trust was facing justice. The woman who had attacked her was in custody. The company that had facilitated the crimes was taking responsibility. Most importantly, she and Grace were safe, financially secure, and surrounded by people who actually cared about their welfare. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Mitchell. Heard about today's events through the hospital grapevine. How are you and Grace doing? Emma typed back. We're doing better than we have in months. See you next week for our regular appointment. As she settled into her favorite chair, the one Richard had always complained was too worn for their living room, Emma realized that for the first time since discovering the affair, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Tomorrow she would wake up in a house where no one was lying to her. Tomorrow she would make decisions based on what was best for her and Grace, not what would protect a cheating husband's reputation. Tomorrow she would start building the life she actually wanted, instead of trying to save a marriage that had been dead for months. Grace kicked again, and Emma spoke softly to her unborn daughter. It's just going to be you and me, baby girl, but we're going to be just fine. Better than fine. We're going to be happy. Outside, Jake sat in his truck for a few more minutes, making sure Emma was settled before heading home. His phone rang. Detective Reynolds. Jake, thought you'd want to know. Richard's attorney called. He's accepting the plea deal. 3 years for embezzlement, 2 years for conspiracy, sentences to run concurrently. He'll be eligible for parole in 18 months with good behavior. And Vanessa? 2 years plus 3 years probation. She'll serve her sentence at the Women's Correctional Facility in Sterling. Her pregnancy is being monitored, but the stress has caused complications. She may lose the baby. Jake felt a moment of sadness for the innocent life caught in the middle of adult selfishness and cruelty. And the civil proceedings? Emma's settlement with Morrison Tech is being finalized tomorrow. She's walking away with a clean slate and a consulting contract. Richard's stock liquidation will cover the embezzlement restitution and provide Emma with additional financial security. So it's over. The criminal case is over. But Jake, you should know that Richard's been making statements about appealing, about fighting the charges, about proving that Emma orchestrated everything as revenge for his affair. Jake's jaw tightened. Let him try. Every piece of evidence we gathered is legitimate and admissible. Richard's problem isn't the evidence against him. It's that the evidence is overwhelming. Just wanted you to be prepared. Men like Richard don't go down quietly. After ending the call, Jake looked up at Emma's house one more time. The lights were on in what would soon be Grace's nursery, and he could see Emma moving around, probably checking on the baby furniture and preparations for her daughter's arrival. Richard Morrison could make all the threats and file all the appeals he wanted. It wouldn't change the fundamental truth. He had betrayed his family, stolen from his company, and conspired in the assault of his pregnant wife. Those weren't crimes that money or lawyers could make disappear. And Emma wasn't the naive, trusting woman she'd been 8 months ago. She was a mother preparing to raise her daughter with the knowledge that strength and integrity mattered more than wealth and status. Richard had lost far more than his freedom and his money. He'd lost the chance to be part of something good and pure and hopeful. That was a loss no appeal could ever reverse. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. 3 months later, Emma Catherine Morrison cradled her newborn daughter in the rocking chair Jake had built for the nursery. Grace Elizabeth Carter Morrison, Emma had legally changed both their names after the divorce, was a perfect, healthy 7-pound miracle with her mother's dark hair and her uncle's determined chin. She's beautiful, Em, Jake said softly, sitting on the floor beside the rocking chair. Absolutely perfect. Emma looked down at her sleeping daughter and felt a peace she'd never experienced before. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and preparation for single motherhood, but they'd also been the most honest and authentic months of her adult life. Dr. Mitchell says Grace is developing exactly as she should, Emma said, adjusting the baby's blanket. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs, and apparently her father's stubborn streak. Her father's stubborn streak is going to serve her well in life, Jake replied. Speaking of which, how was your meeting with Morrison Tech yesterday? Emma smiled. They officially offered me the position of Director of Strategic Development, part-time for the first year, with an option to go full-time when Grace is older. The salary is enough to maintain the house and build a real college fund for Grace. And you're accepting? I already did. Thomas Bradley said I have a natural talent for client relations and strategic planning. Apparently, 4 years of managing Richard's social and business obligations taught me more about corporate management than I realized. Jake grinned. I could have told them that. You were always the one keeping Richard organized and focused. He just took credit for your work. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her expression tightened slightly. What is it? Jake asked. Richard's lawyer. He wants to schedule a video call so Richard can see Grace. Jake's expression darkened. From prison? He has parental rights, even from prison. The lawyer says he wants to be part of Grace's life when he gets out. What do you want to do? Emma looked down at her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully against her chest. I want to protect Grace from the kind of man who would conspire to harm her before she was even born. But I also know that someday she's going to ask about her father, and I want to be able to tell her that I gave him every chance to be the man she deserved. So you'll allow the video call? One call, supervised, recorded, and with the understanding that any further contact depends on his behavior during his incarceration. If he uses prison time to become a better person, maybe we can discuss visitation when Grace is older. If he spends it planning revenge or blaming everyone else for his problems, then Grace is better off without him. Jake nodded approvingly. That's fair, more fair than he deserves, but fair. Emma's doorbell rang, and Jake went to answer it while Emma stayed with Grace. She heard familiar voices in the hallway and smiled as Patricia Morrison, Richard's mother, appeared in the nursery doorway. Emma, dear, Patricia said softly, her eyes immediately drawn to her granddaughter. She's absolutely beautiful. Emma had been dreading this moment for months. Patricia Morrison was a formidable woman who had never particularly approved of Emma's middle-class background. Emma had expected anger, blame, or attempts to defend Richard's behavior. Instead, Patricia approached the rocking chair with tears in her eyes. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward Grace. Emma carefully transferred the baby to her grandmother's arms, watching Patricia's face transform as she held her granddaughter for the first time. "She looks like Richard did when he was born," Patricia whispered, "but she has your strength in her face. I can see it already." "Mrs. Morrison," "Patricia, please." "And Emma, I owe you an apology. A profound apology." Emma blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For raising a son who thought his wants were more important than his responsibilities. For not teaching him that marriage and fatherhood require sacrifice and commitment." Patricia's voice was thick with emotion. "For not recognizing that you were exactly the kind of woman he needed to become a better man." "Patricia, you couldn't have known. I knew Richard was selfish. I knew he was entitled. I chose to believe those were strengths instead of character flaws that needed correction." Patricia looked up from Grace to meet Emma's eyes. "I failed him as a mother, but I won't fail this little girl as a grandmother." Emma felt tears start to flow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that regardless of what happens with Richard, I want to be part of Grace's life. I want to help you raise her, support you both, and make sure she knows that she comes from a family that values integrity and strength." Jake appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" "Everything's perfect," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "Patricia was just telling me about her plans to spoil her granddaughter." "Within reason," Patricia said with the first smile Emma had seen from her in years. "This little girl is going to know her worth, understand her heritage, and grow up with the confidence that comes from being truly loved." As Patricia held Grace and told her stories about the family history that Richard had never shared, Emma felt another piece of healing fall into place. Grace wouldn't grow up without extended family after all. She would have a grandmother who understood that love meant more than money, a uncle who would protect her from anything that threatened her happiness, and a mother who had learned that strength came from standing up for what was right. "Emma," Patricia said quietly, "I have something for you." She handed Emma a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. "This was my grandmother's engagement ring. Richard never asked for it when he proposed to you because he said you wouldn't appreciate antique jewelry." Patricia's voice was bitter. "He was wrong about that, just like he was wrong about so many things." "Patricia, I can't. It's not for you to wear. It's for Grace. For when she's old enough to understand what it means to be part of a family that values lasting love over temporary passion." Emma accepted the ring box with trembling hands. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a granddaughter worth being proud of. And thank you for being strong enough to protect her when her father wouldn't." As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself surrounded by the family she'd chosen rather than the family she'd been born into. Jake was assembling a new changing table. Patricia was organizing Grace's wardrobe by size and season, and Dr. Mitchell had stopped by to check on both mother and baby. "Your recovery is remarkable," Dr. Mitchell told Emma as she finished her examination. "Physically and emotionally, you're healthier than you were during most of your pregnancy." "Stress is a powerful thing," Emma replied. "When I was living with Richard's lies and betrayal, my body was constantly fighting anxiety and uncertainty. Now that I know the truth and I'm in control of my own life, everything feels easier." "Speaking of which, have you thought about dating again? It's normal for new mothers to wonder about future relationships." Emma looked at Grace, who was awake and alert in her grandmother's arms. "Right now, I'm focused on being the best mother I can be. But someday when I'm ready, I want to find someone who loves Grace as much as they love me. Someone who sees her as a blessing, not an obstacle." "You will," Dr. Mitchell said confidently. "You're a remarkable woman, Emma. Any man would be lucky to be part of your family." As evening approached and the visitors departed, Emma found herself alone with Grace for the first time since bringing her home from the hospital. She carried her daughter to the window that overlooked their small backyard, where Jake had built a swing set in anticipation of Grace growing old enough to use it. "This is your world, baby girl," Emma said softly. "It's not the world I thought I was giving you when you were still in my belly. It's smaller, quieter, less luxurious. But it's honest. Everyone who loves you in this world loves you for who you are, not what you can do for them." Grace made a small cooing sound, as if she approved of the arrangement. "Your daddy made some very bad choices," Emma continued. "Someday, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you the whole story. But I want you to know that his failures don't define you. You get to choose the kind of person you become." Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her check. "Emma, this is Dr. James Peterson from Children's Hospital. Patricia Morrison gave me your number. I'd like to take you to dinner sometime and meet Grace. If you're interested, my number is 550147. No pressure." "James," Emma smiled. Patricia had mentioned that one of her charity board colleagues was a pediatrician who had recently lost his wife to cancer. He was raising two young children alone and understood the challenges of single parenthood. Emma wasn't ready to date yet, but she was ready to believe that someday she might meet someone who would love both her and Grace completely. For now, that possibility was enough. As she prepared Grace for bed, Emma reflected on how much her life had changed in just 6 months. She'd gone from being a desperate, betrayed wife to a confident single mother with a career, a support system, and a future full of possibilities. "Bedtime, sweet girl," Emma whispered as she placed Grace in her crib. "Tomorrow we start building the rest of our lives together." Grace opened her eyes one last time, seeming to study her mother's face with the serious expression that reminded Emma so much of Jake. "I love you, Grace Elizabeth," Emma said, "more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. And I promise you that every choice I make from now on will be about protecting and nurturing the amazing woman you're going to become." As Grace drifted off to sleep, Emma stood by the crib and made a silent vow. Her daughter would grow up knowing that she was wanted, valued, and cherished. She would never doubt her worth or settle for less than she deserved. Grace would grow up to be everything her father had never been: honest, loyal, and strong enough to fight for what was right. And Emma would make sure of it. Family isn't just blood. It's who shows up when you need them most. 1 year later, Emma stood at the podium in the graduation hall of Metro Community College, her nursing degree diploma in her hands and tears of joy streaming down her face. In the audience, Jake held 18-month-old Grace, who was clapping her tiny hands and babbling, "Mama! Mama!" with infectious enthusiasm. Patricia Morrison sat beside them, beaming with pride and occasionally wiping away her own tears. Dr. James Peterson, who had become a steady presence in their lives over the past 8 months, was recording everything on his phone, while his own two children, 8-year-old Michael and 6-year-old Sarah, cheered loudly for their almost stepmother. "Ladies and gentlemen," the dean announced, "please welcome our valedictorian, Emma Carter Morrison, who completed her nursing degree while working part-time at Morrison Tech and raising her daughter as a single mother." The applause was thunderous. Emma had never imagined that going back to school in her late 20s as a new mother would lead to academic honors. But the discipline required to balance motherhood, work, and education had revealed strengths she'd never known she possessed. As she approached the microphone, Emma looked out at the faces in the audience, her chosen family, her supporters, the people who had made this moment possible. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady and clear. "A year and a half ago, my life fell apart in ways I couldn't have imagined. I discovered that the man I'd married was not the man I thought he was. I learned that the future I'd planned was built on lies and betrayal." She paused, looking directly at Grace, who was now reaching for Jake's glasses. "But sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes losing the life we thought we wanted makes room for the life we actually need." Emma's voice grew stronger. 18 months ago, I was a woman whose identity was completely tied to her husband's success. I was living someone else's version of what my life should look like. Today, I'm a registered nurse, a business consultant, a single mother, and a woman who knows exactly who she is and what she's capable of achieving. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. I'm standing here today because of the people who showed up when I needed them most. My brother Jake, who protected me when I couldn't protect myself. Patricia Morrison, who chose to love her granddaughter more than she loved her son's reputation. Dr. James Peterson, who showed me that there are men in this world who see single motherhood as a strength, not a liability. Emma's voice caught slightly as she looked at James, whose love and support had helped her believe in the possibility of lasting happiness again. But mostly I'm here because of Grace Elizabeth Carter Morrison, who taught me that love isn't about perfection or meeting someone else's expectations. Love is about showing up every single day and choosing to be the person your family needs you to be. As Emma concluded her speech and stepped down from the podium, she was immediately surrounded by her family. Jake swept her into a bear hug. Grace squealed with delight at being included in the embrace. And Patricia kissed both Emma's cheeks with the fierce pride of a mother whose daughter had achieved something remarkable. "I'm so proud of you," James said quietly, wrapping his arms around Emma and Grace together. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." "We're proud of you too, Mama Emma," Sarah Peterson said, using the name she'd chosen for her almost stepmother. "You're going to help so many sick people get better." Michael nodded seriously. "And you're teaching Grace to be strong like you." Emma knelt down to hug both children, marveling at how naturally they'd accepted her and Grace into their family. James had been widowed for 3 years when they met, and his children had been hungry for the kind of maternal love Emma was eager to give. "Come on," Jake said, hoisting Grace onto his shoulders. "We have reservations at that fancy restaurant downtown. Time to celebrate properly." As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Richard was still in prison, having served 14 months of his 3-year sentence. He'd written several letters requesting visitation with Grace, but Emma had declined. According to Patricia, who maintained minimal contact with her son, Richard spent most of his time planning lawsuits against Emma, Morrison Tech, and even Jake's security company. He remained convinced that he was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy rather than the architect of his own downfall. Vanessa had been released after serving 18 months and had immediately moved to another state. She'd lost her baby due to complications from stress and had apparently sworn off relationships with married men permanently. Emma occasionally wondered if Vanessa had learned anything from the experience, but mostly she felt grateful that chapter of her life was definitively closed. Morrison Tech was thriving under new leadership. Emma's consulting work had evolved into a full-time position as Director of Strategic Development, and she'd been instrumental in landing several major contracts that had doubled the company's revenue. Thomas Bradley frequently joked that they should have fired Richard years earlier and promoted Emma instead. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, falling into step beside her as they reached their cars. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," Emma replied. "A year ago, I was terrified about how I was going to support Grace and myself. Now I'm making more money than Richard ever gave me access to, and I'm doing work that actually matters." "And you're happy?" Emma looked at Grace, who was chattering away in her own toddler language, while Jake pretended to understand every word. She looked at Patricia, who was already planning Grace's second birthday party, with the enthusiasm of a woman making up for lost time. She looked at Michael and Sarah, who treated Grace like their beloved little sister, and Emma like the mother they'd been missing. "I'm happy," she said, meaning it completely. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely, authentically happy." James took her hand. "Good, because I have something I want to ask you later." Emma's heart skipped, but she decided not to pressure him for details. She'd learned that the best things in life unfolded in their own time, and trying to rush or control outcomes usually led to disappointment. At dinner, Patricia stood up to make a toast. "To Emma, who taught us all that strength isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about facing it with grace and coming out stronger on the other side." "To Grace," Jake added, "who will grow up knowing that she's surrounded by people who would move mountains to protect her happiness." "To family," James said, looking meaningfully at Emma, "the kind we choose and the kind we build together." As they clinked glasses and shared stories about Emma's academic journey, Emma felt a profound sense of completion. Not the kind of completion that came from checking items off a list, but the deep satisfaction that came from becoming the person she was meant to be. After dinner, while the children played in the restaurant's small play area, and Patricia and Jake argued good-naturedly about Grace's bedtime routine, James led Emma onto the restaurant's outdoor terrace. "Emma," he said, taking both her hands in his, "this past year with you and Grace has been the best year of my life since Sarah died." Emma's breath caught as James dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we haven't been together very long, and I know your life is complicated, and I know that taking on two more children isn't exactly what you might have planned for yourself." "James," Emma whispered, tears starting to flow. "But I love you. I love Grace. I love the family we've started to build together. Will you marry me?" Emma looked at the simple, elegant engagement ring in the box, then at the man who had shown her what real love looked like. James had never tried to change her, never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. He supported her career, adored her daughter, and treated her like an equal partner in every decision that affected their growing family. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely, yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma heard cheering from inside the restaurant. Through the window, she could see Jake, Patricia, and the children watching the proposal with huge grins. "They were in on this?" Emma laughed. "Your brother threatened to hurt me if I didn't ask for his permission first," James admitted, and Patricia insisted on approving the ring. She said Grace's stepfather needed to understand the family standards for jewelry. Emma threw her arms around James's neck, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she'd built from the ashes of her first marriage. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined at 24. It was better. It was real, honest, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. "I love you," she whispered against his ear. "I love you and Michael and Sarah and the life we're going to build together." "We're going to be happy," James said confidently. "All of us. For a very long time." As they walked back into the restaurant to share their news with the family, Emma caught sight of her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her was confident, radiant, and at peace. She looked nothing like the frightened, betrayed wife who had been attacked in a parking garage 18 months earlier. That woman had been broken by betrayal and rebuilt by love. She'd learned that strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it with integrity. She'd discovered that the best revenge against people who tried to destroy you was living well and raising good children. Most importantly, she'd learned that family wasn't defined by blood or legal documents. Family was defined by who showed up when you needed them most, who celebrated your victories, and who helped you become the best version of yourself. As Grace toddles over to her mother and future stepfather, babbling excitedly about the pretty ring, Emma lifted her daughter into her arms and felt the last piece of her healing fall into place. Richard Morrison had given her a daughter and then tried to destroy them both. But his betrayal had led Emma to discover reserves of strength she'd never known she possessed. His absence from their lives had made room for people who truly loved and supported them. In trying to eliminate Emma from his life, Richard had accidentally given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to become the woman she was always meant to be. "Thank you," Emma whispered to Grace, who was now trying to eat her engagement ring. "Thank you for making me a mother. Thank you for giving me a reason to fight. Thank you for teaching me what unconditional love really means." Grace looked up at her mother with Jake's determined eyes and Emma's compassionate smile. And Emma knew with absolute certainty that this little girl would grow up knowing exactly how much she was worth. That knowledge would be Emma's greatest legacy and Richard's greatest loss. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with something much more powerful: redemption, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge that love always wins in the end. Outside the restaurant, snow was beginning to fall, blanketing the city in pristine white. Inside, Emma Carter Morrison was surrounded by her chosen family, planning a wedding, celebrating a graduation, and building a future that was more beautiful than any dream she'd ever dared to imagine. The parking garage where her nightmare had begun was less than a mile away, but that felt like a lifetime ago, experienced by a different woman entirely. This woman, this strong, educated, professionally successful, deeply loved woman, had been forged by fire and emerged as pure gold, and she was just getting started.